and I am proud to serve as the president for our Circle of ODK. Omicron Delta Kappa is a national leadership honor society that recognizes students, faculty members, and administration for their outstanding contributions and leadership in the major areas of campus life. Our society's tradition of this lecture series began several years ago and is based on the last lecture concept, popular with higher education institutions worldwide. Top academics are asked to think deeply about what is most important to them, and then construct and deliver a hypothetical last talk, answering the question, what wisdom would you wish to impart on the world if this were your last chance? Or the less morbid version, if you had one lecture to give, what would you say? Tonight I am delighted to introduce one of our top academics, Dr. Drew Dalton, Assistant Professor of Philosophy, who will share with us his last lecture. Dr. Dalton received his MA and PhD from the Catholic University of Leuven in Belgium and has been an active member of the FSC community. He is a respected scholar and has published many articles in top philosophical journals, as well as a book, with another book on ethical decision-making on its way. Dr. Dalton is well-liked and revered by his students, both within and outside of the philosophy department. When asked to describe Dr. Dalton, students call him supportive, engaging, erudite, and eloquent, committed to education, sassy, and the epitome of what a professor should be. He is an amateur jazz guitarist, devoted runner, lover of modern architecture, street art, indie rock, the Marx Brothers, and oatmeal cookies. Tonight's lecture is entitled The Love of Wisdom and the Wisdom of Love, Learning to Desire Rightly with Philosophy. Please welcome Dr. Drew Dalton.
Well, I want to say, first of all, how honored I am that some of you have come out tonight, offended that others of you have come out tonight, and honored that still more of you have not come out tonight. So, I'll be totally honest, I'm a little bit embarrassed to give this. I feel a little bit sheepish about the whole thing. I think for a number of reasons, and I'll tell you why. First of all, at Florida Southern College, the idea of a last lecture, as I'm sure Dr. Willis will agree, is just not what we do. It should be a last engaged learning exercise. But I'm going to forego engaged learning exercises and actually give a last lecture. I'm sure you'll all forgive me. But the other reason is because when Katie, oh, there she is. I always overlook the front row. You're welcome. When Katie kind of told me about this, the idea of sort of, if I had one last lecture to give, or what sort of wisdom would I have, or what sort of parting message would I have, or whatever, that sort of thing, there's something a bit presumptuous about it for a couple different reasons. The first of all is because I'm not necessarily convinced I have anything good to say, at least from myself. I mean, I see that my job as a philosophy professor is to be as clear a channel as possible to the various philosophical traditions from the history of philosophy, and my students know that. So every time I step in front of the class, I try to sort of, I joke that I breathe in the vapors of philosophy, and then I come out like the Oracle of Delphi, and I just sort of deliver whatever message it has. And they'll know, because 1 week it seems as if I'm passionately preaching Platonic philosophy for all it's worth, and then next week we're doing the same thing with Aristotle, and those are two positions that you can't sort of hold simultaneously. And to be totally honest, that's a position I'm much more comfortable in. I like the idea of becoming transparent in the philosophy classroom. By transparent, I don't mean you can see everything from my life. No, I like to be as opaque as possible in that. And in fact, many of you will be familiar with what I like to call my fictitious autobiographical examples. So I give autobiographical examples which are entirely made up. But I like to be transparent in the sense that I don't really exist, that all I am is a mouthpiece for whichever thinker we're addressing on that day. And again, those of you who've been in the class are familiar with that, which creates no small amount of consternation from my students who by the end of the semester will oftentimes be like, damn it, what do you think? And in fact, today, Jay here, sitting in the front row, said, okay, are you telling me that how I should live, or do you live your life by this? And I said, no. And who cares what I live my life by? Like, that's neither here nor there. What Kierkegaard is saying is we should do this. Does that make sense? So I feel a bit sheepish about having to put myself in front for once and say what it is I think. I've tried to get a little bit more comfortable with that recently at the behest of some of my students, but I still feel a little awkward. So I hope you'll forgive me if I feel a little bit strange about that. It doesn't feel totally natural to me. Right, okay, so when I got asked to do this originally, my first thought was, okay, honestly, if I had one thing that I have gained in my life, one lesson that I really feel like I've learned, it's the power of comedy and the power of laughter to save your life. I can honestly say that my life has been saved. Not metaphorically, as the word that you often misuse, literally saved my life many times. And so I initially thought I was giving a little lecture, taking a line from a poem by Ginsberg called America. And the line is, "Everybody's serious but me." And I was going to talk about how much a good joke is like a good philosophical question. And the goal was, as some of my students know, to follow up some advice that a great philosopher, Wittgenstein, once said. So Wittgenstein once said that he believed that it would be possible to write an entire book of philosophy consisting of nothing but jokes. And I thought, I'm going to give a philosophical lecture consisting of nothing but jokes. But as I thought more about it, I realized that what I was doing was subtly evading the task of this lecture, which is to put myself a little bit on display and say, if I had one thing to say, what would it be? Because by telling jokes, all I'm subtly doing is kind of ironizing the whole situation, so that I can once again sort of fade into the background and allow something else to take over. So it felt a bit dishonest. But it also felt like it would be betraying what I really would have to say. And so I thought again about it. I thought, well, honestly, if I only had one thing to say, what it would be, frankly, the very thing I say on the first day of class, in every class I've ever taught. And that's to talk a little bit about what philosophy is. So, for some of my students and my majors who have the disfortune of having taken me 6, 7, sometimes more times, this is a lecture with which you are intimately familiar. Feel free to leave now. For the rest of you, I hope it will be useful because I want to talk a little bit about what philosophy is, why it matters to me, and honestly, I hope to have you all leave committing yourself to being philosophers. Now, by being philosophers, I don't mean being philosophy majors, because frankly, that's not for everybody. But one can be a philosopher regardless of what their major is, unless they're interested in poetry, and then you're just lost. Oh, I'm sorry, Dr. Bernheim. Evidence of the lostness. So, I want to talk a little bit about, so I entitled it, The Love of Wisdom and the Wisdom of Love, Learning to Desire Rightly with Philosophy. It's a little bit of a misnomer because I'm not honestly going to talk about how to desire rightly, although it's going to be hidden in there. What I'm going to talk about is how to respond to our desires, which I think is in much the same way as learning to desire rightly. So frankly, I'm just going to introduce to you what the task of philosophy is, what it is I as a philosopher esteem to do, and therefore what it is I hope all of you will esteem to do. Does that make sense? So, let's start with a very simple question. Look at this, it's a present. Look, I made a present. By the way, I tried, and this may look miserable, but can anybody tell, I tried to sort of make it look a little bit like a Greek letter. Thank you, phi. Yes, it's a miserable version because I have to put information in there as well. But phi is the sort of first letter of the word philosophy. Hello, Ron. Hello, sir. Everybody? Ron Pino. All right, so I tried to make it look like the letter phi because the letter phi is the first letter of the word philosophy in Greek, and the word philosophy comes from Greek, but it doesn't look very pretty. But okay, we'll deal with that. All right, so our very first question is, what is philosophy, right? Now, this would be a wonderful opportunity to engage in engaged learning, but I will spare you that. So, this is an unusual question because oftentimes we think we know what philosophy is. It's a word we all use very often, or it's a word at the very least which we see used very often. Unfortunately, it's often misused. So one of the things I like to tell my students is the very first time I ever saw the word philosophy used, it was on the back of a Redken shampoo bottle. Now this is true. I didn't grow up in an educated home like many of you where you sit around the dinner table discussing Aristotle or whomever he is into this week. All right, but the back of Redken bottle says, at Redken, our philosophy is X. And I remember thinking like, oh, okay, so philosophy is like a mission statement. It's like a sales technique, right? And lo and behold, we use it that way. Florida Southern's philosophy is to provide blah, blah, blah. I will maintain to you that that is not what the word philosophy means. Now, others of you may mean, and I'm not going to call out the soccer team here over there, but I could perhaps pass by your house late on a Saturday evening and smell some strange odor drifting off the porch as you discuss philosophy. I'm not saying this happens. This is a purely fictive autobiography. You see how they work? And you may think you're discussing philosophy as you sort of dissect Pink Floyd lyrics. And you're like, what if we all are fish in a fishbowl? Right, that's not philosophy either. Philosophers actually have a term for that, and if you're offended by salty language, cover your ears at this point. That's bullshit. So, as philosophers, we're not interested in bullshitting either. No offense, Ricky. All right, so what is philosophy? To understand philosophy, it's a bit useful to go back to the word itself. In fact, I would maintain that the entire idea of what philosophy is and how philosophers do philosophy is hidden in the word itself. Hence my use of the letter phi in my crappy prezi. So let's start with this. Philosophy is first and foremost a compound word. In fact, it's a neologism. It's not a terribly neologism, it's a pretty old neologism. But as neologisms go, it's still neo. Meaning, don't worry, Tristan, you can come in. Nobody's embarrassed, except for you. Oh, Tristan Dawson, I'm going to introduce everybody who comes in. All right, it's a neologism, which means, I see, I'm always tempted to start going into teaching mode and be like, which means what? Okay, again. Let's not. All right, so it's a neologism, which means it comes from, it's a combination of two older words to create a new word, right? So it's a compound word. So it is a compound word which is traditionally attributed to Pythagoras, who's, oh, that's so cool. Don't worry. Whose dates are as follows: 570 BCE to 495 BCE. You'll notice he lived backwards. He lived Benjamin Button. All right, so Pythagoras is originally credited with coining the word philosophy. All right. Now there are some who say that he didn't coin it, but originally is. By the way, does anybody remember who Pythagoras is? What do you remember? Oh, that's cheating. Like the physicist gets to say, like familiar with math. Okay, so Pythagoras, of course, you're familiar with what?
The triangle guy.
The triangle guy. That's right. The Pythagorean theorem. Do you guys remember this? A squared plus b squared equals c squared. Nobody's embarrassed for you. All your parents are so proud. Okay, so Pythagoras also coined this word philosophy. And again, it's a neologism. But of what? Of two words. The first word, philo, which means to have a strong affinity with or attraction to something or someone. It's considered in Greek a kind of desire. It's a species of desire. There are various kinds of desire. And it's traditionally rendered as love. Now, this is classical Greek. In Koine Greek, this kind of desire, philo, takes on a more specific designation, as many people have pointed out, which is what, Dr. Harper?
Friendship.
Friendship. So the kind of love which one would have between friends. So in fact, some say what Pythagoras meant by Philosophia is to be a friend of something, Sophia, whatever that would be. But others have argued that in classical Greek, no, it indicates something more erotic than merely friendship. And lo and behold, if we read the Platonic writings, when he talks about philosophy, the kind of love he's talking about is incredibly erotic. And if you question that, read the text, with a bottle of red wine and some, I don't know, very, very mannerly. Very intense or very white. I don't know, it depends on what you're into. So, philo is the first part. The second part is Sophia. So what is Sophia? Sophia is a way of knowing, a familiarity with, or a facility for. It's often indicated as skillful or cleverness, and we traditionally render it now as wisdom, right? But you'll notice again for the ancient Greeks, it's a different kind of thing than we say wisdom. When you think of wisdom these days, you may think of the sage on the mountain, somebody who has lots of wisdom, grandpa. But in fact, you'll note that for the ancient Greeks, somebody who has Sophia has a kind of skill. They know their way around. There's a kind of cleverness to them, right? So, what is philosophy? Quite simply, and this is the end of the lecture, it's a philosophia. It is a love of wisdom. Wonderful. So that's what philosophy is. To be a philosopher is to be a lover of wisdom. Right. Except, what does that mean? You'll notice I censored myself. I did not say a bad word that I typically would say while lecturing. Brad Hoggins said I curse in the classroom. I'm sorry. All right. It's a love of wisdom. But what the heck does that mean? See? All right. It's a love of wisdom. So, well, obviously we need to break this down further. First and foremost, what do we need to know? What is love? So what is love? Okay. Well, we have to understand what love is, and this is the first thing we need to do in terms of trying to understand what philosophy is, therefore what I do, and therefore what I think you should do. Well, love is a species of desire. That much we know from the Greeks. So, which begs another question. What is desire? We need to understand what desire is. So, we want to understand philosophy as love of wisdom. We need to understand love. If love is a kind of desire, we need to understand desire. Desire, fortunately, seems to be relatively easy to understand. Because at the very least, while many of you haven't experienced love, and some of you never will, Jake, you have all experienced desire. So what is desire? Well, desire, there are typically 3 stages of desire which define and outline the experience of desire. Desires typically arise out of an absence. We feel some sort of lack. We feel that something is missing that should otherwise be there. This absence corresponds to some determinate object, right? And the object of that desire acts as the aim of that absence, right? That is, its telos, what it's shooting for, but also its end, its terminus, that where it ends, right? So, in other words, as the end of desire, qua telos and paros, qua terminus and aim, does everybody follow me this? The object of desire is what defines it, what defines it, what gives it its limitations, its ends. It's what distinguishes it and names it. I'll give you an example in a moment. So again, arises out of absence, proceeds towards some determinate object, and of course ends in presence. You can imagine an empty glass, an object, and it fills the glass, and now we say that there is something present in the glass. Where there was something absent, there is now something present. And what is this presence? Well, once the object of desire is grasped, it's consumed, integrated into us, and we feel that the lack, which is desire, so the desire is the lack, is filled, presence and wholeness is restored, and we no longer have the absence, we no longer have the lack. I see some people from various disciplines in here. Feel free to think about how mitochondria sort of absorbs, cell walls and stuff. All right, so it ends in presence. As a result of it, we feel, and you'll notice it in the word, I'm going to kill myself. We feel full, filled, we feel fulfilled, right? Or satisfied, the desire ends. So, to tease this out, let's think about a particular kind of desire. Any kind of desire will do. My favorite one is hunger, because it corresponds to my favorite of the 7 deadly sins, which is gluttony. That's what I'm doing in my free time, just getting gluttonous. Alright, so how does hunger manifest? Well, to be quite naive about it, hunger arises out of a kind of nutritive lack. There's some sort of absence. I have exhausted the resources in my body. It proceeds towards some determinate object, let's say a ham sandwich. And when I eat the ham sandwich and absorb it, the ham sandwich is no longer separate and independent from me. It's now integrated into my body, and I feel fulfilled, satisfied. I'm no longer hungry, right? Presuming you're eating because you're hungry and not merely bored or because it tastes good. You simply want the sensation. Does everybody make sense? All right. Now, this is the traditional rendering of love. If love is a desire, then love is traditionally rendered as, lo and behold, arriving out of some absence, proceeding towards some determinate object, and ending with satisfaction and fulfillment. And if you doubt that this is the way that love has traditionally been rendered, all you need to do is look back to the traditional texts. One of my favorites is St. Augustine, who once said, our hearts are, when describing love, our hearts are restless till they find their rest in thee. Right? This idea that for Augustine there is some determinate absence in his life. The idea of what's absent in him is, of course, the presence of God. The object of his love is God, and the satisfaction or completion of this comes in heaven. This, in part, is what's symbolized in the Holy Feast, right? At least according to some Catholic thinkers, right? Take this bread. This is me. You eat it. You're satisfied momentarily. It wears off after a week, so you got to go back on Sunday and eat some more of Jesus or whatever it is you do. Now, of course, I'm fictionalizing the account, and certainly my colleagues in the Department of Religion said, well, this is not the way that every thinker understands it, and certainly this is not, and of course not. We're not trying to stereotype these things. We're saying that you can see that in ancient texts, this is clearly how love has been understood, right? You're removed from the thing, absence, you proceed towards some determined object, and it ends in presence. But ask yourself for a moment, is this how you experience love? Does love truly arise out of some lack or absence within you? By the way, again, the first presentation of this that I can think of, again, would be in Plato's Symposium, when, split and then go to 2 different ways. Aristophanes. When Aristophanes gives his thing, right? You're cut off from your other half, Once you're reintegrated with them, then you're fulfilled. So there's this idea of love arises out of an absence, proceeds towards the object of love, which is the lover, and then ends in some sort of satisfaction, which again is only temporary for Aristophanes, because eventually your lust will arise again. Okay? But ask yourself, does love, in our experience, have it truly arise out of some lack or absence within us? Second of all, is the aim of love typified as an object? Or is there something off in that? Meaning, when we think about what we love, do we think of them as an object? When McDonald's says, I'm loving it, are we okay with that? Do we think they've used the word love correctly? Or think about it another way. In Augustine's metaphor, if love is really just a kind of hunger, does that make God a kind of metaphysical ham sandwich? You know, like I'm hungry, I'm going to go munch on God, and then I'll get fulfilled. Is it about, is he merely an object? Is God an object for us? Or is God somehow different? Is the object of our love, even in our concupiscent love, are they an object? Or are they somehow somewhat different? And finally, ask yourself, let's assume for a moment that you're able to unite with your lover. Is the feeling satisfaction? Great, I've got that done. Thanks so much. I'll call you again. Or is love somehow different? Do we distinguish that? If someone only calls you when they feel like they're lonely, and devours you as they would an object, and then gets up and leaves, would you go, it's so nice to know you love me? Or would you be somewhat suspicious of their love? Would you say, you're not interested in loving me, you're interested in lusting after me, or something like that? This seems to call into question the idea that love is a desire. Indeed, it seems to suggest that if love is a kind of desire, it's certainly an unusual kind. And lo and behold, even the ancient Greeks and these people realized this. Now why? Because it seems to kind of invert the traditional structure of a desire. How so? Well, if a traditional desire arises out of an absence, proceeds towards an object, and ends in satisfaction, you'll notice love functions somewhat differently. First of all, I would maintain that love does not arrive out of an absence, but it arrives out of a presence. Love, oh, I already said that. Look at that. Love does not arrive out of an absence. And there's two loves there, just to make sure the preposition is in the proper place. And I have not checked this. All right. Love arises out of the presence or appearance of something new. So in other words, love doesn't testify to what may or may not be missing within us, but it's a sign that something new has been added to us. So I'm going to say that love is not the result of an absence, love is the result of an abundance. Right? So I don't walk around feeling as if there's a gap in my heart, and then all of a sudden I find someone who fortunately can fill the gap for me, thank goodness. No, it's when I meet that person that all of a sudden I felt as if something was lacking to begin with. They awaken me by adding something new to my life. Do you see? Love responds to a presence. It's not a pre-existing absence or lack. Does everybody understand what I'm suggesting? Okay. I'd say then that love does not proceed towards some determinate object, but towards some determinate subject. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with the object-subject distinction, we'd say that an object is something which takes its life from the outside, just kind of giving a rough, hewn definition, whereas a subject is something that lives its life from the inside, that has its own sort of interior point of view. And we'll skip over all the philosophical debates about how do you know whether something's an object or a subject, and we'll just say usually it tells you. All right, so it proceeds towards a subject. Love does not pursue an object, but it relates us to another subject. That is, it relates us to another person like ourselves. It doesn't pursue a thing, it pursues someone, whom we call the beloved. Does that make sense? The beloved, moreover, is not passive in our love, but active and dynamic. So it doesn't sit out there and wait to be taken. The lover, the beloved, beckons us. They motivate our love. They don't merely receive it. They don't just simply sit there and go, love me. No, they solicit our love. There's something about them that calls to us, and they call to be loved, and they call to love in return. Does that make sense? So you see, I really believe when McDonald's says I'm loving it, until that hamburger stops and says, seriously, do you love me? Then I don't think I can love a hamburger. I think I can really like a hamburger, but I don't know if I can love a hamburger. Don't think I haven't tried. Finally, not only does it arrive out of presence proceed towards the subject, I would say that it doesn't end in satisfaction. Instead, it ends in longing. Love is not fulfilled in the beloved, but it longs for more of the beloved. Love is not something which can be satisfied. As such, it points us towards the infinite. Why the infinite? Because there's no finite object. There's no end. There's no object that defines it, right? So again, to go back to hunger, we call that experience hunger because the object which defines it and ends it is food, right? And that's why we can get confused. And anybody who's a parent knows this. Like, you can see the kid standing there and staring into the refrigerator and be like, are you hungry? I think so. I don't know. Are you maybe I'm just thirsty. Maybe, you know what I mean? Or, do you see? So it's the object that defines the nature of the absence or lack. But since there's not an object to this, and it can't be fulfilled, it's kind of infinite, or at least indefinite. It just seems to keep going. So the beloved, moreover, is not integrated into us. We don't consume the lover as an object and integrate them into us. Just the opposite. The beloved calls us out of ourselves in the consummation of love. They call us to exceeds. There's a sense in which, if anything, the beloved makes us restless. We may want to be reading and relaxing and winding down. They say, pay attention to me. They may say, this is just a theoretical example, fictional, autobiographical. All right, just let me read, you may say. Let me be in my own world. But they solicit you. They call you out of yourself. So you can see that love, as a movement, seems to happen almost conversely to what desire is. So if love is a kind of desire, hunger is really unusual. Does that make sense? How can we frame this? Let's frame it in three simple statements. Love doesn't satisfy our longing, it deepens it. Whereas the object of our desires satisfy it. Love, in a sense, as deepening something, kind of poses a question. So it poses a question rather than answering a question. Does that make sense? So if you think about, like in French, we were talking about this recently, appel et réponse, a call and response, right? We think about a statement making a response, ending the question. And lo and behold, it's interesting, graphically in our grammar, we make an indication of this. So a sentence you punctuate with a, why don't we ask our English professors? A nice, simple sentence, propositional sentence.
Ends with a period.
It ends with a period, which is what? A whole circle. They were nervous, called out on the spot. Now they know how you feel. Right? It ends in a period, which is, how does a question end? With a question mark. Now notice, what is a question mark? A question mark is precisely the displacement of the period. It's an opening which displaces that below it. So even more graphically, the graphe of our grammar indicates that a question is an openness. It's open-ended. Whereas a period is a closedness. A question is an existence, is an exceedance. It opens you up. It pulls you beyond, right? Whereas an answer closes that openness. So if love is not something which points towards a satisfaction but solicits us out of ourselves towards something which may not have an ending, love in a sense is a kind of question. The experience of love poses an existential question for us. Does that make sense? Everybody understanding that? So I think we should punctuate statements of love with question marks. I love you. All right. Finally, as a question, and as something which doesn't satisfy us but deepens us, love demands something of us. By soliciting us, love demands something of us, right? So it's not like in a normal desire where we can demand something of the object. I want you in my belly. Love gets to demand something of us because we're related to a subject. It says, oh, you need more, or you need to do this, or you need to do that. And by the way, you never get to that comfortable place, where it's like, finally, everything's fine. Once you do that, that's partnership. That's it. That's not love. That's what I have. I'm kidding. I don't want to air our dirty laundry here, Robin. All right, joking. All right, now, so love does not satisfy our longing, it deepens. Love poses a question to us. Love demands something from us. Does that make sense? Okay, so here we are down the rabbit trail. Let's remind ourselves why we're here. Because we're interested in asking the question, what is philosophy? And we're interested, first of all, in this first part of what is philosophy, the love that Pythagoras says is so essential to this experience, or to this pursuit that I've committed myself to and that I want you to commit yourself to. Does that make sense? Whether you're a religion major, a music major, a nursing major, criminal justice major, whatever, I want you to be a kind of lover. Yeah? I would quote Kierkegaard here about not being flirters, but lovers. But I won't. All right, so if we've now seen what love is on the basis of philosophy, we can say, well, okay, if love is this question, it's to pursue wisdom. So think about love as this pursuance, this longing, yeah? So what is love? Well, love in philosophy as a love is to pursue wisdom. The fundamental assumption of philosophy is that the experience of love, this sense of love, poses a question for us that wisdom presumably answers. That's the fundamental assumption. That we have this experience of a kind of restlessness that Augustine starts with, right? This sense of something being demanded of us. This question which is posed in our very being, in the way we live our lives. And the assumption is that wisdom somehow answers that experience, that restlessness, that, stuff. All right. So to love wisdom, to be a lover of wisdom is, I'm going to say, to attend to the questions which is posed by love by pursuing wisdom. I mean, it's sort of a circular sentence, but you'll see it. What does it mean to love wisdom? What does it mean to be a philosopher? It's to attend to those questions that are raised in our experiences, that sense of restlessness, that sense of being demanded something of, yeah? That sense that there's something more out there, that sense of unsatisfaction. And it's to pursue that not by trying to consume objects or by trying to sort of stuff them down and ignore them. To be a lover of wisdom is to open yourself up to those questions, to pursue wisdom. So, to love wisdom, to do philosophy, you'll notice is, according to me, to be open to the questions that love poses. Open to the questions that are posed by this strange and unusual experience. It's to respond to the demands of our longings. It's to cultivate the dissatisfaction, to not give in to the temptation of or trying to integrate something into us and be satisfied by it. It's to pursue the infinite, whatever that may or may not mean. Yeah? And finally, it's to welcome the subject of wisdom. It's to welcome that other that demands love from us. Does that make sense? It's to say yes to it, as Nietzsche said. Yeah? The immortal yes. He says the child's yes. Only the child says yes. So it's to make oneself a kind of cosmic child, always saying yes to these strange solicitations and experiences that are solicited to us, right? Okay, so that's one half of it. To be a lover of wisdom is to open oneself up to love, which, as we've seen, is not to open oneself up to habitual satisfaction. It's to open oneself up to dissatisfaction. To be a lover of wisdom is to open oneself up to love, which means it's not to be at peace, but to be open to demands. But also, to be a lover of wisdom means to be open to love, which means to be open to other subjects, other living things. There's another part of love. I mean, to this word philosophy too, right? Which is what? Not just love, but wisdom. Who said something?
Sophia.
Oh, Sophia, right, okay, yeah, sorry. No, it's Sophia. But that's what it is. It is the subject. So the idea is, if there is this love of wisdom, if this is what the experience of love is, the presumption is that wisdom is a kind of subject. That wisdom has a life. That wisdom is not merely some object. Now listen carefully. Wisdom is not some objective data, some object that you can possess and hold and write down on a piece of paper and fold up in your wallet and keep there, so that whenever you need a little wisdom, you can pull it out and go, oh, here's the objective wisdom that I needed. Wisdom is not something that can be taken a photograph of and posted on Ashley Mirberg's Facebook wall with like some vague beach behind it, and as we were saying today in class, some even more dubious attribution to the Buddha, because Mirberg's never checked out whether or not the Buddha actually said, hey everybody, we just need to love each other, that's the path to peace. And then what you do is you go, I like, that's objectively true, I agree. Wisdom cannot be passed along in these objectively quotable nuggets of dubious wisdom. It's not even wisdom. Did you see what I'm saying? So wisdom, if it's the subject of love's longing, must itself have a kind of different way of being than mere objectivity. So, we've talked about Philo, let's talk about wisdom. Noting that wisdom is the subject of love, wisdom is not a form of objective knowledge. It's distinct from knowledge. So let's go back to those classic Greek designations, because perhaps there's more wisdom in them than we might know. The first one we saw is that wisdom is a kind of cleverness. How long was I supposed to talk for? Alright, because I'm going flying. I'll answer questions at the end. How's that? I'll be like, here's what wisdom is. Wisdom is a kind of clever. Now notice, what does it mean to be clever? Clever first of all, a kind of intellectual power, right? When we say that somebody's clever, we're saying that they have a kind of intellectual power. But more than that, it means, when we say clever, it means being able to see connections between things or to perceive things at a deeper level, deeper hidden level than the superficial, right? So, having a kind of cleverness, for example, in mathematics, doesn't merely mean to be able to do the kind of mere computation. It means, for example, to see the rhythmic relationship between the numbers, right? There's a beautiful elegance to that. To be a clever mathematician means being more than merely a kind of good calculator, right? It means being able to understand why these things are true. So, for example, those of you who are in my logic class, or who have taken logic, will know I'm not interested in you in merely memorizing the rules of logic. I want you to understand why these things work on. So cleverness means being able to get to that deeper level, not merely being able to compute them and calculate and see whether or not something is or not. So, wisdom indicates a kind of cleverness, of being able to see things at a deeper than superficial level. Next, and I think this is lovely, especially when we consider the fact that wisdom is the subject of love, it implies a kind of familiarity with. Now look at the key word here. It's a family. Wisdom implies being familiar with, not merely acquainted with. Yeah? You have a relationship with wisdom. You don't possess it like an object. You have a familial relationship. So that's why I think it's so lovely that Philo later gets rendered as a kind of brotherly love, or as a sort of love between friends, or a love between family. Because in fact, the idea of being a lover of wisdom means becoming a family member of wisdom. Like, sort of, you have a relationship with this thing. There's some intimacy in wisdom as a result. If it means this familiarity with it, implies a kind of intimacy. Finally, wisdom indicates a way of being. So it's more than merely knowing something, but I think a good way of rendering it is knowing one's way around. Does that make sense? So, for example, Dr. Bernheim is here. I would say that Dr. Bernheim has a kind of wisdom about Chicago. Now, it's not that she knows how to get from point A to point B in Chicago. That's knowing something. Anybody with a map can study that. She has a way of being in Chicago that indicates a kind of Chicago-ness, if that makes sense. Does that make sense? I mean, any tourist who's studied a map well enough can be in Chicago, can navigate the city streets. But knowing like what's going on or how this whole thing connects, that way of being in a place is different. I think musicians particularly familiar with this idea. There's a difference between knowing how to play the thing versus being in the piece that you're playing, right? You really want to embody the piece, be inside of it. I mean, this is the difference between a fantastic technician, for example, on a piano piece, versus somebody who really plays the piece. Does that make sense? Are you following this? I mean, painters as well can understand this, because there's a difference between somebody who may have a mastery of a technique, but there's when you talk about it with lovers of art, they'll say, but it has no soul. You know, it's just, I mean, wow, I can't even see a single brush. Fantastic. Like, I don't care, it's a bowl of fruit. You know? Like, it's a classical, technical mastery, but there's no way of being in. Okay, so wisdom implies this being in. So it implies what we consider to be a superlative way of being in life, right? When we say that somebody is wise, we're saying they really know their way around life. Yeah? They don't just know about life, they know their way around life. They can see the interconnections, there's a cleverness, they're familiar with how things work, and they're able to kind of be comfortably in that. That's why we seek them out for advice, right? It's not that we think that they're going to print out some technical sort of, here's the thing you should do in this sort of situation, right? We don't assume that wisdom indicates this sort of objective knowledge. And finally, as a way of being, you'll note the emphasis is on a verb there. So again, it's not an object, some situated fixed thing. It's not nominal, it's verbal. Wisdom is demonstrated in action, not merely in speech. Again, wisdom is not demonstrated in the sort of repetition of some objective knowledge or objective fact. Wisdom is demonstrated in a way of being, in a way of action. You can see somebody who's wise even if they never see. Does that make sense? So this is what is wisdom. We've seen what is love. Now we're looking at what is wisdom. So let's see if we can't make some sort of synthetic whole of this. In relationship to love. Wisdom is a way of being which attends to the solicitation of love. That's what wisdom is. It's a way of being, a way of acting, which responds to that unusual longing or solicitation or demand of love. Remember, love poses a question. Love demands something from us. Wisdom is the way of acting which responds to that demand, which says, I personally think it's expressed most lovely in the Hebrew, Henani, here I am. I am here. You have called, appel, réponse. I respond. Yeah? That's from the Abraham narrative, you know? Moi voici, here I am. Like, you know, Hashem calls, and Abraham says, Moi voici, I am here to respond. Yeah? That's a wise response to a solicitation of a God that may or may not be love, but certainly the text seems to suggest that God is. Okay, so what is wisdom? Wisdom listens. First and foremost, wisdom listens to the questions that love poses. If wisdom is an action, what are these actions? First and foremost, listening. An intimate kind of listening. Not assuming that you know what the question is, not rushing ahead to answer. That's what objects are for, and that's what you do to desires. But wisdom, love is a strange kind of desire. So first of all, you have to listen to the solicitation of that thing. What's it asking? And listens, it compassionately attends to the longing articulated in love. As deep calls out to deep, wisdom responds to the depth of the longing of love. Right? It's not there merely to fulfill it or answer it. And of course you guys know this, like, or at least here's a little bit of wisdom for you. When your lover calls out to you in longing, they're feeling they're expressing their things, they're not looking for an immediate solution or answer. And it's difficult to remember that because our temptation is, especially if we love them, we want them to be satisfied. We want them to be fulfilled. But what our lover wants is somebody to attend to their questions. Listen to them. Compassionately attend. Be with them. You see? Not try to satisfy. It's not a desire that's being expressed. It's love. That's why we share our brokenness. It's an expression of love. Okay. What's the second action? Wisdom responds. Wisdom responds to the demands of love. So listen to that. If it's responsible, if it's able to respond because of the demand or solicitation in love, wisdom is responsible. Wisdom is responsible to and for love. To be wise is to take on responsibility for your love and for the love of others. Right? Again, knowing that what we mean by love isn't like concupiscence necessarily. So if somebody calls you and says, I love you, come to my home, you don't have to say, oh shit, no, I gotta respond to that. No, I mean, because sometimes, you see what I'm saying? So I mean, love, that sort of sense of that demand. So wisdom listens, wisdom responds, and finally, I think this is a key element that we also miss. Wisdom resists. Wisdom resists. It resists the temptation to be content with easy answers, or indeed, even maybe final answers. Wisdom resists the temptation to fulfill what we perceive to be a lack. Because if we understand properly that love is not a lack, but the manifestation of an abundance, you don't want to shove it closed. It's the expression of an opening. You don't want to then just batten it down. You've got to resist the temptation to find those answers, even within yourself. So it kicks against the complacency of easy answers. As a result, I would say that wisdom is a kind of revolutionary and dynamic. Wisdom pursues change. Wisdom constantly looks for that restlessness, that non-satisfiable. Does that make sense? That's what wisdom is. So what is wisdom? Wisdom is an action, not an objective noun. And what's the nature of that action? Listening to love, responding to love, resisting the temptation in love. It is listening to our longings, responding to them, and resisting the temptation. It's listening to the subject of love, responding to that subject, resisting the temptation to shut them up or to murder them. Which amounts to the same thing. So here we are. This is going to be the quickest one ever. Am I going to get fired for this? All right. Brad. What's that?
Dr. Hobson.
Is the ODK lecture supposed to be longer? I don't know. So here we go. What is philosophy? Let's talk really quickly and momentarily back through it. We've said that philosophy is a love of wisdom. We've talked a little bit about what it means to love wisdom. Emphasis here on the love. We've said that the fundamental assumption of loving wisdom is that love poses a question that wisdom answers. We've said, therefore, that to love wisdom is to attend to the question that love poses by pursuing wisdom. And we saw that it is to be open to those questions, to respond to those, blah, blah, blah. Now, we've looked at what wisdom is. What is wisdom? To be open to love. respond to it and to resist the temptation to close it off. In other words, I would say that philosophy, in many ways, is the love of wisdom in pursuit of the wisdom of love. I think there's a certain wisdom in our love. There's a certain action in it. It itself is a noun, and it's demanding something from us. It's saying, investigate, question, think. Don't go in for easy answers. Don't go in for ideology. Resist those who would say that they have the final answer. Resist the temptation to yourself. Find some final answer, or to tell others what the final answer is. Listen to that. There's a certain wisdom in that. Yeah? Don't think that the sense of restlessness and longing you have is the sign that something is missing in you. It's the sign that something is extra there. Namely, that your being is present. That's the feeling of being. Listen to the wisdom of being. Love wisdom by pursuing the wisdom embedded in the experience of love itself. Does that make sense? I think that's what philosophy is at its core, in its vaguest expression. Which is why I do it on day one. I was telling Dr. Sting, I do this on day one so that everybody immediately, if they drop my class, they at least go forward going, okay, well, philosophers are full of shit. But at least they know what kind of shit we're filled with. Not the unexpected shit. But it doesn't stink any sweeter than anybody else. So what is philosophy? It's to love wisdom in the pursuit of the wisdom of love. To try to love wisdom by attending to what wisdom is buried, hidden within the experience of love itself. So, bullet point take-homes? What does that mean for you? What should you do? If I want you to go forth and be philosophers, how do you do that? Bullet points. That's how you do it. You like that? Crazy. All right. First of all, listen to your longings. There's something wise in your longings. Your longings point towards the infinite. They point towards the infinite because there is no determinate, finite object or end to them. There's no immediate satisfaction to them. Listen to them. There's some wisdom in your longing. Yeah? Jacques Lacan, a famous French psychoanalyst and somebody who I think is a profoundly wise man, said that the key ethical way of being in the world, and he also thinks especially for philosophers, is this. Ne cédez sur ton désir. Ne cédez pas sur ton désir. Ne cédez pas sur ton désir. And there's a doubleness. Are any French speakers here? Oh, cool. Okay, so I can just make up whatever that means. L'automobile, c'est dans la garage. Is what he said, which means, okay, ne cédez pas sur ton désir. Céder means to give into or to give up on. It's a double meaning. Ne cédez pas sur ton désir means don't give up on your longings. Don't give up on your desire. Pursue it. Cultivate it. But listen to the other part. Ne cédez pas sur ton désir. Don't give in to your desires. Don't give in to the temptation that your desires are desires which can be satisfied, like some object. Resist the temptation of satisfying your desires, but resist the temptation of ignoring them entirely at all. I like to sum up Lacan's phrase, ne cédez pas sur ton désir, with this. Follow your bliss without expecting to be blissed. Follow your bliss without expecting to ever find it. Your longings have a certain wisdom. It's not the sign that something's missing you in the sign, it's the sign that there's wisdom there. There's an inkling, there's a seed of wisdom. Attend to that. Listen to that. Pay heed to your restlessness. Right? I have students come into my office all the time, who say, Dr. Dalton, I really love your class. I'm really enjoying philosophy. This is completely fictive autobiographical example. But what can I do with philosophy? What can I do with it? I need a job when I graduate. To which I have what I go to the propaganda folder. And I show them all the different wonderful things you can do with philosophy. But then I say, okay, but all that aside, that's not why you should study philosophy. You should study philosophy because you're being called to it by your own longings. Live a life which attends to your longings. If you want to live a happy life, a joy-filled life, attend to your longings. Follow your bliss. They will not lead you astray. If you cede pas, if you cede sur, if you give up on your desires and say, I would love to do this, but I have to be practical, you will live a damn good life where all you do is feed your desires and never your loves. At the same time, however, if you're like, throw caution to the wind, I won't study business at all, I'll just be a philosophy major, and then tramp down the highway, just following my bliss, you will also fall apart. I have friends at my local laundrette who I discuss this with. I call it, my students know, I call it the hobo laundrette. And there's not hobos there. One guy's like, yeah, I read Emerson in college, and I decided to drop out from the University of Wisconsin. Just hit the road. And I was like, how's that working out for you? And he goes, not too well. Been on the road for 30 years. So, yeah, okay. So, don't give up on, crush your soul by going to do something that's not what you're passionate about, Ricky. But at the same time, don't give in at and pursue entirely just some sort of weird hedonistic idea of that sort of loop of grabbing objects and shoving them into your maw and thinking that that's somehow going to be. Love isn't going to be satisfied. Give yourself over to that dissatisfaction. Second bullet point. By the way, feel free to write this down on a piece of paper, fold it up, put it in your wallet, or post it on Facebook so your friends can like it, because it's objectively true wisdom. All right, second. Respond honestly to the questions of others, Luke. When they say, how are you? You don't say, fine, thanks. Because there's a question embedded there. Listen to that question. Now, they may not mean, how are you? That may not be the question embedded in the statement, how are you? What may be embedded is, I'm desperately alone and I'm horribly frightened at knowing how to navigate social situations. So I'm going to rely on this everyday statement in the hopes that we can just get through this without, my anxieties coming to the fore. Respond to that. Do you see? Listen to the questions, honestly to the questions of others. Listen honestly to the questions that you're asked. Yeah? And bear in mind, not only of others, but that strange other in you. That extra thing, that presence, that abundance that manifests in our love. Remember, that's not the sign something's missing. There's some other in you, like some weird parasite, you know, and it's asking, so listen to it. So that's part of listening to your longings. But listen not only to your longings, but listen to the questions and longings of others. What do they want from me? Yeah? What does this person want? What are they asking me, really? Does that make sense? Okay. 3. Learn to ask better questions yourself. One of the first things I like to do on the very first day of every philosophy class is teach my students how to ask questions. Because I don't think you know how to ask questions by and large. I mean, my evidence of that is the fact that the vast majority of questions you ask me is, will this be on the final exam? Or, does this matter? Or can I use the bathroom? I say, no! Well, of course you can, but you're not allowed to leave the class. The slop bucket's in the corner. No, but one of the things that we joke about is, and I like to tell a story about the time that I was in Ireland for a conference. And this Irish cabbie picks me up and he goes, what are you here for? And I go, I'm here for a philosophy conference. And he goes, philosophy? You're a philosopher? I go, yeah. And he goes, does that mean you can read my mind? No, it doesn't mean that. But of course, he follows it up with the classic philosophical question that everybody thinks is a philosophical question, which is what? What is the meaning of life? Whoa, hey, look at that. All right, allow. Okay, what is the meaning of life? I'm not convinced that's a very good question. I'm not convinced it's a question at all. In fact, I think it might be something that appears to be a question, but may not have a question at all. In the same way that the sentence, what's the linen of pink, appears to be a sentence. I mean, it has all the structures of a sentence. It has a noun, it has a verb, it has a predicate, subject and predicate, but it's nonsensical because pink isn't the kind of thing that can have a linen. So if I say, what's the linen of pink, it's just like, what does that mean? I think the question, what is the meaning of life, is very similar. I'm not going to go into why that is. But put it this way, I don't think that's a very good question. I certainly don't think that's a question you should be asking on day one of the philosophy class. I think a much better question is this. What makes you ask? Now, not in that annoying philosophy professor way, right? Oh, anything you say, I'm going to respond to the question. Like, what time is lunch? What do you think the lunch is like? No. But here's the thing. There is a wisdom in that question that's not embedded in the objective question itself. When you say, what's the meaning of life? I think there's a better question. Why do you ask? What does it say about you that you're the kind of being that asks that question? What does it say about you that you, A, presume that life does have a meaning, B, are worried that it doesn't, and C, desperately want to know what it is if it's there? Why do you ask that question? And of course, there are subsidiary questions. What do you mean by life? What do you mean by meaning? And once we answer those questions, is this question anymore something we can ask? Or is it something like, what's the limit of pink? Something that appears like a question, but isn't. You see? Learn to ask better questions, better preliminary questions. One of the best definitions of philosophy that I've ever heard comes from contemporary, Bertrand Russell, I think, first said this, but contemporary philosophy, Bertrand Russell, who said philosophers are not interested in answering the question, what is the truth? It's not what philosophers are interested in doing. Philosophers are interested in asking the question, what do you mean by truth? What do you mean when you use the word truth? And what does it imply? And then, of course, Heidegger goes on to say, and what does it mean about you that you are interested and concerned with the truth? What does it reveal about the nature of your being that truth is of concern to you? Because we are beings which are concerned with truth. Yeah? Philosophers are interested in helping us ask better questions about truth. This is why we study the history of philosophy. Not because we presume, and those of you who had me know this, not because we presume that Leibniz or Spinoza or Descartes or Heidegger or Kierkegaard or Husserl, maybe Lenin, have the right answers. This is not why we study it. We study it because it helps us to ask better questions. Like we said today, remember I said, look, when you ask me, do I live my life like Kierkegaard or should one live their life like Kierkegaard? I said, that's not the point. The point is Kierkegaard raises questions for us, which makes us reassess how we do live our lives. And at the end of the day, the point isn't Kierkegaard was right or Kierkegaard was wrong, because philosophy doesn't function in this sort of binary system. The point is, does it transform the way I think about things by having considered Kierkegaard's philosophy? Does that make sense? Kierkegaard raises a question for us that forces a response to us. We need to attend to that question, honestly and sincerely. Yeah? So we need to learn to ask better questions. 4, and this goes all out to the students in the house and the professors. Demand more. You need to demand excellence. You need to demand more. You know this is one of those things that you've heard. If you've been in my class, you've heard me say it over and over and over again. Open yourself up to the demand that is love by demanding more of yourself and of others. Do not be satisfied with mediocrity. Do not be satisfied with complacency. If you have a prof you think is mailing it in, call them out. And I assure you, they will be glad you did. Because they're waiting for that student who calls and demands excellence from them. And we as professors, we have got to resist our temptation to let our students live up to what you guys like to live up to, which is the bare minimum sometimes. You should demand excellence from us. We must demand excellence from you. When you get a C on a paper, that doesn't mean you're crap. That's not what the C stands for. What it stands for is you can do better. It stands for this, not you are crap, but come into my office so that we can work at getting you an A. Because every single person is capable of excellent work. It may not look like what somebody else's excellent work has done, but it will be there. We have got to demand more. Why? Because that's what longing is. That's what love is. It's a demand. It demands something from us. Yeah, and it demands something from others. We have got to be, by opening ourselves up to longing, opening ourselves up to that demand. Not being afraid of demanding. Not being afraid of being demanding either. Yeah? Demand excellence. I'll never forget one of the saddest days I ever had as a professor at Florida Southern College when one of my students told me that they have a professor who does nothing but puts on the PowerPoint, flips through it and says, this is going to be on the exam, this is not going to be on the exam, this is going to be on the exam. I said, please don't tell me that professor's name, because it would be very hard to respect him as a person. But I don't, because that, and I said, if that's what your professor's doing, you need to go to them and say, I want to learn. What can I do? If this is your pedagogy, cool. What can I do more? And you guys know this. The professors that you love and inspire are the ones that demand something of you. colleagues, the excellent ones in here, who I know you know, because they're here, because they are the excellent ones. I mean, I know them all, you know? These are the ones you love, and you love them because they will not put up with your complacency. Yeah? Does that make sense? Demand more. Be open to your longings. Be open to those demands. Resist simple solutions. Love does not ask for an object. It doesn't ask for it to be satisfied. So resist those who would tell you they have the object that can satisfy you. Resist those who come along saying, you feel a lack, you feel a longing, don't worry, I've got the right answer. It's the free market. It's the communist revolution. It's the reconciliation with your primal maternal desires. It's the resist these simple answers. None of those things are going to satisfy your longing, and be dubious of those who say it is, because they are transforming your love into a desire. And you know better. Attend to the wisdom of your love. Your love can't be so easily satisfied by some simple solution, whether it's the revolution or whether it's the free market. So resist those simple solutions. Welcome, as a result, disruptions. When there are disruptions, that is an invitation to think, woo, I did it again. Boy, apparently I like this slide. All right. Welcome disruptions. Welcome when a subject comes along to disrupt you. Sometimes you're pursuing a paper, and you think this is the paper I'm going to write my senior thesis on. But there keeps being this disruptive thought. Be open to that disruption. It's soliciting from you something from you. Attend to it. And sometimes you're in your office thinking, I'm going to write today, I have 5 minutes, I'm going to write this thing, and a student comes in and just says, Dr. How can I talk to you? Be open to that disruption. There's an invitation in it. Be open to the disruptions in your life, and be open to the disruptions you guys have. When a professor comes along and says, you have a paper due this Friday that you didn't know anything about, and you go, that disruption is an invitation. Attend earnestly to those invitations. Be open to those disruptions. One of my favorite poems, as Dr. Bernheim always teases me for, is from Stevie Smith. And it's called The Person from Porlock. Does anybody know who the person from Porlock was? Dr. Bernheim?
I'm not even going to open my mouth.
Ah! All right, so Coleridge was writing Kubla Khan, the sort of classic romantic poem, and you know it's an unfinished poem. According to Coleridge, the reason it's unfinished is because he was writing it, he's just freaking genius, you know, and he's high on some, you know, transcendent experience, which I think was purchased over the counter. But okay, he says, along comes this person from Porlock and knocks on the door and interrupts him, and he blames the person from Porlock for it. Stevie Smith has this wonderful response to Coleridge's poem. She says, I long for a person from Porlock to bring my thoughts to an end. Yeah? I'm hungry to see him. I think of him as a friend. Often I run to the window. Often I look out the gate. You know, she talks about this person from Porlock, and she ends it with this. I'm hungry to be interrupted forever and ever. Amen. A person from Porlock, come quickly and bring my thoughts to an end. Be open to those moments of disruption. Invite the person from Porlock in when they knock. And don't see that they're a disruption. See them as an invitation. When that disruption comes, you should say, Kenani, here I am. Wabasi, I respond to your solicitation. Whether that interruption is a face, a concrete human other who's demanding something from you, or an idea, some neggling thought, I'm not going to be happy in business. I'm not going to be happy in philosophy. I'm not going to be happy in this. My hunger and desires for something else, Michael. Be open to those disruptions, even if they seem to disrupt the comfortable, easy plans of these other things. Music is lovely. Music is beautiful. I want to play music, but I don't want to have to teach kids how to play music. You say, follow your bliss. Don't give in. Be open to the disruption that music perpetually has in your life. That beauty is always disruptive beauty. Beauty is always a surprise. Yeah? Be open to change and be an agent of change. If love is revolutionary, if wisdom attends to the revolutionary experience, you have got to be open to that. Resist holding on to things. Give them the open hand that is a question mark. It's that openness. Be open to that and be an agent of that. Don't keep looking for repetitive things. Don't read the same books. Dorothea Sayre Reeves Henry. Don't read the same books over and over and over again.
Sorry, they're so different.
But be open to new books too. Be open to change. Be an agent of change. Resist the temptation to become sedimented in your life. Yeah? And finally, last but not least, initiate revolution. In the words of Country Joe and the Fish, put down your books and pick up a gun. We're going to have a whole lot of fun. Now, of course, when we say revolution, we do not mean that kind of revolution, although that might be needed at times. Because what we said is already, if I said, yeah, because Mao's, here it is, the little red book will liberate you. No, because you've got to resist those simple solutions. You know better. Look at every time somebody's had a solution. It's always turned out bad. If you doubt this, take a class with Dr. Stinning. It is the history of the failure of like simple solutions. That's what history is. But by revolution, we mean the ability to revolve, to turn over, to start something again, to start something new. That's what your desires are calling for. That's what your longing yearns for. This ever new, infinite, unsatisfiable thing. This awakening. This is what revolution is. Right? So, love wisdom. Be a philosopher. Be an agent of change. Don't give in to your desires. Pursue those questions. Resist simple answers. Keep digging. Yeah? And pursue and demand excellence from yourself and others. And whatever it is you do, whether you're a religion major, a nursing major, an English major, a history major, a music performance major, a music education major, a physicist, a painter, or whatever the hell the rest of you people do. Be a philosopher at it. Attend to the wisdom of love by loving wisdom. Love wisdom in the pursuit of the wisdom of love. Thanks very much.
Bring to mind, if I can paraphrase Burt Bacharach and Hal Willard.
Yes, Burt Bacharach's fantastic.
What do you get when you fall in love? You get enough wisdom to live life fully.
Amen.
So, thank you for your love of wisdom and your wisdom of love, and for imparting those words on us. We really appreciate it. And I thank you all for coming out and being a part of the ODK lecture series. We will have one in the fall once again, and please hang around and talk with Dr. Dalton, and maybe he'll impart some more non-objective wisdom. And give us some more thoughts. But we really appreciate you doing this for us. We appreciate all the professors who have stepped up and done this. It's please show them your gratitude, because this is something that they do out of love. And out of love for their subject, and out of love for what they believe in their hearts. And we thank you for that. We thank all of your predecessors that are here, that were in the lecture series, for sharing in the same way, in the same spirit. Thank you. And with that, have a lovely evening.